Today we're going to learn about 4 basic angle theorems that you hopefully learned when you were in elementary school. So we're going to start with our first one, which says complementary angle theorem, and then in brackets there's the short form CAT or CAT. So sometimes remembering all of these big words is tricky, but the little short forms make it easier. So if I talk about CAT, you'll know that I'm talking about complementary angles. So complementary angles are 2 or more angles that combine to add to 90 degrees. So if you have a diagram, an easy way to spot that is there should be a right angle or a little square in the corner to show that it's 90 degrees. And if you don't see that little square or that right angle, they're probably not complementary angles. So if you have 2 angles and you have that little square, that means that they add to 90 degrees. So the rule for the complementary angle theorem is that there are 2 angles that add together to make 90 degrees. And in your picture, you should see that little square. So we're going to try an example. It says solve for x. I have 2 angles. I have an angle x and an angle 25. And I notice that together they have that little right angle there, which means they should add to 90 degrees. So when I'm doing one of these questions, I like to use an equation. So I'm going to say that x plus 25, if you add them together, should equal 90. And then from here, I'm just going to use my equation solving skills that we've been working on by subtracting 25 from both sides to get that x equals 90 take away 25 is 65 degrees. So x should be 65 degrees. Now, I will point out that the diagrams in this unit are not drawn to scale. So drawn to scale means if you measured it with a protractor, this is not exactly 25 degrees, this is not exactly 65 degrees. But we do try to at least make them look like they're close to that angle. So if I had told you this one down here on the bottom was 65, that wouldn't seem very realistic. But you shouldn't really measure these with a protractor because you're not going to get the right answer. All right, we're going to take a look at our next rule, the supplementary angle theorem. So supplementary angles are 2 angles that add together to make a straight line. So you will know you have supplementary angles when you've got a straight line. And straight lines add to 180 degrees. So the 2 angles in the supplementary angle theorem, or sometimes 3 or 4 or 5, are going to add together to make 180 degrees. And the short form for this one is SAT for the supplementary angle theorem. It's just sometimes easier to remember the short form. So in my picture here, it says solve for x. I have a straight line, that's the thing that I notice, and then I have an angle x and an angle 45. So these 2 angles together should add to 180 degrees because they're making a straight line. So I'm going to do this by making an equation and then solving it. So I'm going to do x plus 45 equals 180. And then I'm going to solve using my equation solving skills by subtracting 45 from both sides. 180 take away 45 is 135 degrees. So my missing angle there should be 135 degrees. Now that is bigger than 90, so it's obtuse, and it makes sense here on this side that this angle is also obtuse. All right, our third theorem is the reflex angle theorem, or otherwise known as RAT. So a reflex angle is an angle that is bigger than a straight line, so bigger than 180 degrees. There are these ones here. They kind of remind me of a Pac-Man, if you know what that is. So those 2 angles, the small angle on the one side and the big angle going around on the outside, together make a full circle. And a full circle, if you remember, adds to 360 degrees. So the reflex angle theorem says that if you take an angle and its reflex, the one going around the back, together they make a full circle, which is 360 degrees. So I have an example here. It says solve for x. I have x and I have 67. So how do I know that when I'm seeing a reflex angle? Basically, we're looking at a full circle. We're going all the way around. So I do notice this giant thing on the back. That's usually a bit of a clue. So I'm going to say that x plus 67 equals 360 degrees. I'm going to subtract 67 from both sides. So you get that x equals 293 degrees. You're welcome to use a calculator if you need to. Now there is one more theorem. This is my personal favorite out of all of the geometry theorems that we learned, and that is the opposite angle theorem. So the opposite angle theorem, otherwise known as OAT, says that if you have two perfectly straight crossing lines, so you probably could have called this X theorem, but that's not what this is called. It's called the opposite angle theorem. So if you have two perfectly straight lines that are crossing, the two angles that are formed on either side of those lines are equal. So x equals y. Now I do have x and y here. It could be the top angle and the bottom angle as long as they are straight lines. So they do have to be straight. They can't be a little bent. So they have to be perfectly straight lines that are crossing to make an x. The angles on either side are equal. So I do have an example here. I have x. I have 50 degrees. It's asking me to solve for x. Now this one I'm not going to make an equation for because there's no need. Right? These are opposite angles, so they are equal, which means that x just equals 50 degrees. That's it. No work needed. So those are our 4 angle theorems that we're going to be working with today. And if you join me in the next video, we'll try doing some examples.